Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics. So the Conservative Party are in a particularly fragile state right now. It is entirely possible that, depending on circumstances, they could rebuild and return to power in the foreseeable future, or, with other circumstances, could collapse entirely and be a spent political force acting as a sort of bridge between the Liberal Democrats and Reform UK. So what are the circumstances which could lead to the destruction of the Conservative Party? What would take its place, and would it be better or worse than we have now? But first, for daily political commentary, please click the subscribe button so you don't miss out. So the Conservative Party being destroyed over a period of perhaps the next 10 years. Not necessarily as insane as it sounds. I'm not saying it's likely, but the Tories, they might win the next election. Who knows? But they might also be exterminated. They're incredibly chaotic. And one of their big problems, as I've discussed earlier this week, is they're not learning the lessons from history because they keep rewriting history to suit themselves. But when you do that, there are no lessons to learn because you're rewriting the mistakes you made. You're sponging away your own failures. There is a pathway to them rebuilding, though I don't think it will be Kemi Badenoch at the helm. Let's look at some of the possibilities. So let's say Donald Trump goes full MAGA madness, like the full works, everything he's been promising in the lead up to the election, and he causes so much damage to America that it's clear to see from this side of the Atlantic. Well, the mud from the explosion will stick to Nigel Farage quite badly, and it could make Reform UK much less appealing, easing the pressure the Tories have on their right flank. Look at the way, for example, Brexit forced anti-EU parties in the rest of Europe, because there's various countries in Europe that have their own major political groups that also wanted to leave the EU. They all had to disavow that. It's like, leave the EU? No, of course we don't want to do that. That'd be madness. Why would we do that? When populism goes very badly wrong, it does make people elsewhere sit up and take notice. But it does have to go very badly wrong. Trump could well strike a blow against populism around the rest of the world if he gets to do what he wants without the emergency brake in operation. Also, I've discussed recently, the MAGA Muppets could turn on one another if their project gets out of hand and they need people to blame. Imagine Musk using what's left of Twitter to launch a war against Nigel Farage rather than Keir Starmer, for example. But the damage could also make Labour's work more difficult, potentially even resulting in a recession. The resultant infighting in Labour would weaken their electoral prowess, easing the pressure on the Tories' left flank. It is possible. But there's another possibility as well. Actually, there are loads. But the next few years are going to be full of so many possible pathways that chaos, I think, is still going to be the order of the day. But the worst case scenario, arguably, for the Tories is that what Trump does doesn't cause so much damage that the heat is felt too badly in the UK. Trump was a disaster in his first term, but he wasn't such a disaster that he dealt a blow against populists in Britain. So let's say Reform UK keep powering up, focused on the areas where Labour are making little to no tangible progress. Let's say some aspect of immigration or maybe housing. Reform are likely to have a few electoral successes in the next few years amplified by their mates in the media. They could do well in the Senate elections and even have something to crow about in the Holyrood elections on the same day in 2026. And all Reform UK have to do is win more seats than the Conservatives in Wales and Scotland. And that's possible. And they will claim they can do the same across Britain as well in the next general election. Doesn't matter that it won't be true, they will claim it. And that could result in votes flipping to Reform in the belief that they are now the emerging power on the right wing. In the meantime, the Tories will be trying to appeal to Reform voters by pretending to be a more credible version of Reform UK at the point at which they'll be looking like the less credible version, whilst trying to retain the more moderate voters by not being quite as insane. In other words, trying to appeal to everyone but actually appealing to nobody. Also, because the Tories didn't close loopholes allowing wealthy foreigners to donate to political parties, there's not a lot at the moment to stop MAGA luminaries funding Reform UK. It may or may not be Musk's vaunted $100 million, but Farage might well attract sizable donations from his mates in America, which will be used to harvest even more Tory votes. And all because the Tories thought their loopholes, which they were warned about, were working in their favour at the time. Labour have said that they're going to be looking at a range of measures to crack down on dodgy funding, but this isn't expected until later on this Parliament. So although new rules will be in place for the next general election, and hopefully they'll actually be strong enough this time, that won't stop donations to Reform UK over the next couple of years at least, to establish more support before the new laws are implemented. And at the other end, Labour may actually make good on their plans to improve housing, energy, transport, the NHS, trade, and most importantly, people's bank balances. Keir Starmer was going on about that again today when he was taking questions from a group of school kids at Downing Street. The focus is on people feeling that they've got a better standard of living. This would shore up their own support and perhaps attract more from those who didn't believe Labour would actually improve things. The Conservatives are already in a hole. They suffered their worst defeat in history, and by some margin. So there's no doubt about it. They have to make huge gains in terms of the number of votes they can attract. They're going to lose more voters to old age than any other party, and they're not attracting new recruits from younger voters. Reform UK are also attracting a lot of elderly voters, but they do attract younger ones as well, particularly young men. If the Lib Dems also emerge as a more credible opposition, while the Tories continue to refuse to apologise for the state they left the country in, so it looks like they're not even penitent at all, and they keep trying to work out how to undercut Farage with weaker versions of his aims, then the Conservatives could get squeezed from all sides much more. They've already lost all their Welsh Westminster seats. Same may happen in Scotland next time, with a further clattering of seats around England as well, even if just to the Lib Dems rather than Labour as well. Nothing to suggest that Reform UK could win more seats than the Tories still. I'm sure there's enough ingrained automatic voting behaviour to keep the Tories afloat for a bit yet. But if they dropped below the level of the Lib Dems, and if Reform won a substantial number of seats, let's say 20 to 30, albeit that would probably be partly at a cost to Labour, then the Tories really could lose relevance very quickly. No longer with any automatic rights to be heard in the media, with Reform UK gaining momentum and the Tories reduced to something like, 60, 70 seats? After 5 years in opposition, they wouldn't be coming back to power anytime soon, so there'd be little value in donors giving them large sums of money in the hope of a return on that investment. So the future of the Conservative Party at that point really could be very uncertain. It could be back to being the main power again in a decade. It's possible. But I still think incredibly unlikely at the next election, but possible in 10 years. But they could also just as easily be wiped out within that coming decade. And if so, what would replace it? Well, I could see the Lib Dems taking advantage of more coverage in the media, which they would get if they became the second party, to shore up the centre-right vote. Their general policies on EU integration, support for expanded social care, and there's various other policies as well, would be appealing to specifically the voters they would need to attract. Reform UK would act as a sort of unifier of the hard right and anti-immigration vote. This might leave the Conservatives still in the middle. I don't think a new party would emerge. It would make more sense for the Conservatives to simply adapt and try and find some middle right-wing ground if they realise where the gaps are in the policies of Reform and the Lib Dems. We may end up with a three-way fight for votes on the right wing, but would this be better or worse than what we have now? Well, I think probably better than the Tories in their current form, objectively. I get that people could argue if you could get back to the John Major style of Tories, that wouldn't be so bad. Although from my point of view, it's always been annoying to me that the left-wing vote is split and the right-wing vote is not. So I welcome a splitting of the right-wing vote anyway. But in terms of, could the Tories go back to a John Major style Conservative Party? I'm not sure there are enough moderates left in the party. And the ones who do exist clearly feel that they're not powerful enough to take a stand on anything because they don't. Tobias Ellwood did on Brexit in the last Parliament. He's the only one who ever stood up and argued for, not even against his party's, doctrines, just argued for a debate on them. And he was shot down every time, and he's gone now. If Reform disappeared, would the Tories actually moderate? I'm not sure they would. But I'm also thinking that Reform UK are not going to disappear until they're satisfied that the Conservative Party has permanently morphed into a better resourced version of themselves. Basically, if the Tories did come back to power in 10 years, I think there would be not very much different to Reform UK now. So I would certainly take an outcome where the right-wing vote, which is not small, is split multiple ways. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, you can join for memberships. Thanks for watching. And until next time, I'll see you later.